Ever get that feeling? Like you're trying to buy something, maybe like new headphones, and you're looking at reviews and everyone's saying different things, and you just end up more confused.
Yeah, I've been
Like information overload, you know?
yeah.
And it's not just headphones, it's everything. Which is why we're diving into Saul Perlmutter's third millennium thinking
Yeah.
today. You brought some interesting excerpts, so let's unpack them. What really struck you?
Well, Perlmutter really nails that feeling, right? Like, it's not just about being overwhelmed by choices at the store. It's this constant deluge of information everywhere. Makes it tough to even know who to trust and what's true, even for people like me. And I deal with this stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's like we're drowning in data, but we're still thirsty for knowledge, right?
Exactly.
Perlmutter, he calls this the challenge of expertise in our modern world.
He does. And, you know, he argues it's not just making us indecisive, this information overload, it's pushing us to extremes. We end up in these echo chambers, only see information that we already agree with.
Yeah, it gets very us versus them very quickly.
Exactly. And that makes it harder to actually solve problems together. But here's where Perlmutter throws a real curveball, and this is what got me thinking. Imagine your grandma's on life support. Awful situation, but stay with me. We have a decision to make, right? Now, we could have an AI analyze all her medical data, all of it, instantly, but would we be okay handing over a decision that big, that final, to a machine?
Whoa, that's heavy. It really makes you think about the limits of data, even if it were perfect. Like, could an AI understand the emotional weight of that decision?
Exactly, and that gets to the heart of what Perlmutter's saying. We can't just blindly trust experts, or data for that matter, but we also can't just go with our gut all the time. So how do we find that balance, that solid ground in this crazy sea of information?
I feel like we need a whole new set of skills, a new way of thinking, just to navigate the world today.
And that's where third millennium thinking comes in. See, Perlmutter argues it's less about the information itself and more about how we interact with it, how we evaluate it.
Okay, so how do we interact with information differently then? Because, some things we can experience directly, like how well those headphones fit on our ears.
But other things, like the long-term effects of, say, some new technology, that's a whole different ballgame. Perlmutter calls this the difference between, and forgive me, I always mess these up, interactive exploration and...
reality at a distance?
Yes, that's the one.
So with those realities at a distance, right, those things we can't just, test out ourselves. How do we know what to trust?
Yeah.
It's like we need a way to trust the map, even if we haven't walked every single trail.
Perfect analogy. And Perlmutter actually uses a really good one himself. He talks about a raft.
Okay.
Think about how a raft gets its strength.
Right.
It's all about how those logs are tied together. And our scientific understanding, it's kind of similar. It's strong because the evidence, it all interlocks. So we trust a scientific finding not just because of one study, but because it fits into a whole network of research.
So it's like, instead of taking one study as the be-all and end-all, we need to zoom out, get the bigger picture, right? Like see how all the pieces fit together.
Easily.
It's like those corroborating witnesses you were talking about earlier. But how does that actually work in the real world?
Well, Perlmutter uses a great example, Galileo in the telescope.
Oh, interesting.
So you have this revolutionary tool, lets us see things we never could before, right? But even then, people didn't just immediately accept everything they saw. It took time.
Yeah, makes sense.
People needed to play with the telescope, test it, compare what they observed, and over time, as that evidence built up, it all pointed to the same conclusions, like it triangulated the truth.
Right, so the more we can look at something from different angles, different sources, the more solid our understanding becomes.
Exactly.
It's like when I was buying my new laptop, I didn't just look at one review, right? I checked, 5 websites, compared specs, watched videos. I needed to be sure.
There you go. That's the triangulation approach, actively searching for those different perspectives.
Instead of just falling down a rabbit hole of one article.
Exactly. Zoom out, get the lay of the land.
But even then, even when we do all that, we have to admit, there's still uncertainty. I think we all remember those early pandemic predictions. Even the experts got things wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Perlmutter calls that the perils of overconfidence.
And it makes sense. We all crave certainty, but the world's messy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's often a mirage. And it's funny, Perlmutter himself, he got caught in that trap once. He tells this great story about the false pulsar.
The what? Okay, I gotta hear this. What's the false pulsar?
Okay, I gotta hear this. What's the false pulsar?
So, pulsars, they're these super dense stars, right? And they emit these incredibly regular pulses of radiation.
Okay.
And Perlmutter, he was working on this project, searching for them, and he found one. a signal that looked perfect, like textbook pulsar.
Wow, so he's thinking, Nobel Prize, here I come. Well, yeah, pretty much. He was ecstatic. But then, here's the kicker. It turned out the signal, it wasn't coming from space. It was a faulty instrument in the lab. Can you believe that?
Oh no, all that excitement for a loose wire or something.
Exactly. And it really shook him, made him realize how easy it is to get blinded by what we want to see. Especially in science, you're looking for these breakthroughs, these patterns, and sometimes you find them where they don't exist.
So it's like even the smartest people can fool themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be aware of uncertainty. Perlmutter talks about two kinds. There's statistical and, what's the other one?
Systematic.
Yes, systematic. So statistical uncertainty, that's like the randomness in data. You can't get rid of it completely. But then there's systematic uncertainty. That's the tricky one because it comes from our biases, our methods.
Okay, so like the way we collect data or even just the questions we choose to ask, that can all skew things.
Exactly. We need to be aware of both kinds of uncertainty to avoid jumping to conclusions.
Right, like hold our conclusions a little more loosely, but how do we actually do that in our own lives? Any tips?
Definitely. One thing Perlmutter suggests is deceptively simple. He calls it consider the opposite. Basically, whenever you have a strong opinion about something, force yourself to think, okay, but what if the opposite were true?
Interesting. So like have a little debate with yourself. Play devil's advocate for your own beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. Helps you break out of that confirmation bias trap where you only see what confirms what you already believe. By considering the opposite, you get a more balanced view.
That's actually really helpful. I'm going to try that.
Oh, it's powerful. And there's another strategy Perlmutter talks about, blind analysis. This one's about removing information that might bias your judgment.
Like those blind taste tests.
Yeah.
Where you don't know what you're tasting.
Yes, exactly that. It forces you to judge based on pure experience, not your preconceived notions. Perlmutter talks about how it's used in all sorts of fields, from wine tasting, obviously, to job interviews.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So it's about taking the labels off, seeing things for what they are, not for what we expect them to be.
Exactly.
Makes me think of this case study Perlmutter talks about, the Denver billet study. What was that about again?
Oh, that's a great one. So the Denver police, they needed to choose a new type of bullet. And obviously, that's a really charged issue.
Yeah, people feel strongly about that. Lots of factors to consider.
Exactly. There's safety, effectiveness, the risk to bystanders, all of it. So they did this really interesting thing. They separated the facts from the values.
Okay.
So they had experts provide data about each bullet type, stopping power, penetration, all the technical stuff. But then they had citizens rank how important different outcomes were to them.
Yeah.
Like reducing fatalities versus minimizing harm to bystanders.
Interesting. So it wasn't just experts making a decision in a vacuum. They got community input too.
Exactly. And it worked. By separating those two things, the technical stuff and the values, they found a way to make a decision that everyone felt good about, or at least could understand how they got there.
That's really cool. It feels like that kind of gets to the heart of what Perlmutter is talking about with third millennium thinking, right? It's not just about being smart. It's about being smart together.
Yes, it's about collaboration, about being open to different perspectives, being willing to change your mind. It's about creating a trust economy where we value those things.
So it's not just about what we think, but how we think, and how we think together. Huh. That's a pretty profound takeaway from this deep dive. It's a call to action, really. Be more intentional about how we approach information. More critical, more collaborative.
Absolutely. Because, as Perlmutter says, this isn't just some abstract idea. It has real implications for how we tackle challenges we face, as a society, as a planet, in this new millennium.
And it starts with each of us, right? Cultivating those habits of mind. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Big thanks to Saul Perlmutter for giving us so much to think about. And to you for these amazing excerpts and insights.
My pleasure. Always enjoy these conversations.
And to everyone listening, keep those critical thinking caps on. The pursuit of knowledge is a team sport, as they say. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.